Somewhere in your day, someone says something that pulls at you. A comment, a jab, a remark wrapped in a joke, a message that sits in your chest longer than it should. Your mind reacts before you even choose to react. You feel the urge to answer, to correct them, to defend your name. But answering everything keeps you tied to people and moments that never deserved your time in the first place. This is a struggle most people carry but rarely name out loud. Knowing when to speak and when to simply let something pass without turning cold, without becoming someone you don't respect. Stoicism has an answer for this, and it has nothing to do with avoidance. If this channel helps you think more clearly and live with more control, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. It helps this message reach more people who need it, and it keeps this channel growing so we can keep building these ideas together. Number 1. What ignoring really means in Stoic terms. Most people think ignoring someone is a form of punishment. You go quiet to make a point, to show displeasure, to win a silent battle of wills. This is not what the Stoics meant by withdrawing attention from someone. For the Stoics, ignoring was never a weapon. It was a boundary. There is a sharp difference between silence used to hurt and silence used to protect your own mind. One is petty, the other is disciplined. Once you understand this difference, the entire idea of ignoring someone changes shape completely. Epictetus taught that our peace comes from focusing only on what is within our control. Another person's words, tone, and behavior are never within your control. What is within your control is your response. When you ignore someone with a clear and steady mind, you are not punishing them. You are simply refusing to let something outside your control decide how your day will go. This is not coldness. This is ownership of your own attention, which is one of the most valuable things you possess. Rudeness comes from intention. If your silence is meant to wound the other person, to make them feel small, to send a message of anger, then it has crossed into rudeness, even if you never raise your voice. But if your silence comes from a place of calm detachment, if you simply choose not to feed a situation that has nothing productive left in it, then you have done nothing wrong. The Stoics were deeply concerned with intention, because intention is the true measure of virtue, not the outward appearance of an action. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself that other people's actions are simply not his concern to control or correct at every turn. He would remind himself that many people act out of ignorance, not malice, and that reacting to every provocation would drain him of the energy he needed for more important matters. This same idea applies to your daily life. Someone can say something careless or hurtful, and you can recognize it as a reflection of their own state of mind rather than a demand for your energy. There's also a quiet strength in choosing not to explain yourself every time someone pushes for a reaction. Many people expect an argument, a defense, a justification. When you withhold that reaction, not out of fear, but out of clarity, you take back a kind of power that arguing would have given away. Silence, used this way, is not weakness. It is one of the clearest signs of self-control a person can show, because it takes discipline to stay calm when everything around you is asking you to break. By the end of this outline, one truth becomes clear. Ignoring someone the Stoic way is not about pretending they don't exist or treating them with contempt. It is about protecting your inner state from being dictated by someone else's mood, words, or provocation. This is not rudeness. This is one of the oldest and most practical forms of self-respect, and it is available to you the next time someone tries to pull you into something you don't need to be part of. Number 2, the line between what you control and what you don't. At the center of Stoic philosophy is a single, simple division. Some things are within your power, and some things are not. Your judgments, your choices, your responses, these are yours. Other people's opinions, their tone, their behavior toward you, these are not yours. Most unnecessary suffering in daily life comes from confusing these two categories. When someone is rude, dismissive, or provoking, the instinct is to fix it, to correct their view of you, to make sure they understand your side. but their perception of you was never something you could fully control to begin with. This is where the subtle art of ignoring becomes practical rather than theoretical. If you accept that you cannot control how someone treats you, then arguing with them, explaining yourself to them, or chasing their approval becomes a waste of the one resource that is entirely yours, which is your attention. Choosing to disengage is not surrender. It is simply putting your energy where it can actually make a difference, instead of pouring it into a situation that was never going to change based on your effort. Seneca wrote extensively about the danger of letting other people's actions determine your emotional state. He believed that a person who is easily provoked has essentially handed over control of their peace to anyone willing to provoke them. Think about how often this happens without notice. A rude comment ruins an entire afternoon. A dismissive tone from a coworker replays in your head for hours. In each case, someone else, often without even trying, has taken control of your mood. Ignoring, done with awareness, takes that control back. This does not mean becoming numb or detached from people entirely. Stoicism was never about suppressing emotion or pretending not to care. It was about recognizing which emotions are worth acting on and which ones are simply noise. When you feel the urge to respond to something petty, pause and ask a simple question. Does this deserve my attention? Or is this something that only feels urgent because of pride? Most of the time, the honest answer is pride, not necessity. There's also a quiet discipline in accepting that you don't need the last word. Many arguments and tense exchanges continue far longer than necessary, simply because one person refuses to let the other have the final say. The Stoics would view this refusal as a form of vanity, a need to be seen as right rather than a need to actually be at peace. Letting go of the need to win every exchange is one of the most freeing shifts a person can make, and it often looks from the outside exactly like calm, respectful silence. When you master this distinction between what belongs to you and what doesn't, ignoring someone stops being an emotional decision and becomes a rational one. You're not reacting from hurt or anger. You're simply recognizing that certain situations do not require your involvement and choosing accordingly. This is the foundation the rest of this practice is built on, and once it becomes second nature, very little that other people say or do will have the same power over you that it once did. Number 3, silence as a strategic response, not an escape. There is a common misunderstanding that silence is passive, that choosing not to respond is simply avoiding conflict out of fear. In Stoic practice, silence is often the opposite. It is an active, deliberate choice made from strength, not weakness. Anyone can react. Reacting takes no skill at all. What takes skill is recognizing a moment where speaking would only add fuel to something that doesn't need to burn any longer, and choosing restraint instead. This kind of silence requires more discipline than any sharp reply ever could. Consider how differently a moment unfolds when you respond instantly versus when you allow space before deciding whether to respond at all. The instant reaction often comes from the same part of you that feels attacked, embarrassed, or challenged. It is rarely your clearest thinking. The Stoics placed enormous value on the pause, the brief space between stimulus and response, because that pause is where reason lives. Ignoring someone, in this sense, is often just an extended pause, giving yourself room to decide with clarity rather than impulse. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself constantly about the shortness of life and the waste of spending it on things that don't matter. He viewed unnecessary conflict as one of the clearest wastes of a limited resource, time. When you look at a rude comment or a petty provocation through this lens, the choice becomes obvious. Is this worth spending part of my day on? Most of the time, the honest answer is no. Silence in these moments is not weakness. It is simply good judgment about where your limited time is best spent. There is also something to be said about the message silence sends without a single word. A calm, steady non-response often communicates more clearly than an argument ever could. It shows that you are not rattled, that your sense of self does not depend on winning this particular moment. People who provoke others are frequently looking for a reaction, because a reaction confirms that they have some power over you. When that reaction never comes, the provocation often loses its purpose entirely, and the other person is left holding something no one picked up. This strategic silence is different from cold, punishing silence, and the difference lies entirely in your internal state while practicing it. If you are silently fuming, rehearsing arguments in your head, waiting for a chance to strike back later, you have not practiced Stoic silence. You have simply delayed your reaction. True Stoic silence comes from a place of genuine indifference to the outcome of the conflict, not suppressed anger waiting for release. This is why the internal work matters just as much as the outward behavior. Learning to use silence strategically changes the way you move through difficult conversations and difficult people. You stop feeling the need to respond to every remark, correct every misunderstanding, or defend every opinion. You start choosing your battles with intention, saving your words for moments that actually matter. This is not a loss of voice. It is the refinement of it, so that when you do speak, your words carry more weight because they're no longer scattered across every small disagreement that crosses your path. Number 4, disengaging without malice, the internal discipline. The hardest part of ignoring someone well is not the outward silence. It is the internal battle happening while you stay quiet. Anyone can stop talking to someone. Very few people can do it without secretly wishing harm on them, without replaying the situation with anger, without waiting for a moment to feel superior. True Stoic disengagement requires managing this internal noise, not just the external behavior. Without this internal work, silence becomes a mask for resentment rather than a genuine release from the situation. Epictetus taught that it is not events themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about those events. Applied here, it is not the rude comment itself that continues to bother you after you've walked away. It is the story you keep telling yourself about it. The imagined comebacks, the replayed conversation, the mental argument that continues long after the real one ended. Ignoring someone outwardly while still fighting them internally is not peace. It is simply a private, unfinished argument that only you are still having. Real disengagement means addressing the judgment itself. Instead of thinking this person is trying to hurt me and I need to protect myself by shutting them out, try shifting the thought to this situation does not require my energy, and I am choosing where my energy goes. This subtle shift removes the emotional charge from the decision. You are no longer ignoring someone as a defensive reaction. You are simply allocating your attention with intention, the same way you would decide not to spend money on something that offers no real value to your life. There is also a difference between disengaging with resentment and disengaging with acceptance. Resentment keeps you tied to the person because you are still emotionally invested in what they did and what they deserve. Acceptance releases that tie completely. You are not waiting for them to apologize, to understand, or to change. You have simply accepted that this is who they are in this moment and that your peace does not depend on them being any different. This acceptance is what allows silence to feel light instead of heavy. Practicing this daily requires honest self-reflection. When you catch yourself ignoring someone, it is worth pausing to ask what is actually happening internally. Are you at peace with the decision, or are you quietly punishing them and calling it peace? The Stoics were relentless about self-examination for exactly this reason. It is easy to convince yourself that your motives are pure when really you are just avoiding an uncomfortable confrontation while nursing private anger. Real growth comes from being honest about which one is actually happening. Over time, this internal discipline becomes easier, and disengaging without malice starts to feel natural rather than forced. You stop needing to win the silence because you are no longer keeping score. The other person's actions simply stop carrying the weight they once did. Not because you have hardened yourself, but because you have genuinely let go of the need to control how they see you. This is where Stoic silence stops being a technique and becomes a real, internal transformation. Number 5. Living this practice in everyday relationships. Understanding this idea in theory is one thing. Living it in the middle of a difficult family conversation, a tense exchange at work, or a friendship that has turned one-sided is another challenge entirely. The real test of this practice is not in calm, quiet moments of reflection. It is in the heat of an actual disagreement, when your pride is asking you to respond and your discipline is asking you to pause. This is where the philosophy either becomes real or stays theoretical. Start small. Not every rude comment requires a grand act of Stoic restraint. Sometimes it is as simple as choosing not to reply to a passive-aggressive message right away, giving yourself time to respond from a clear place instead of an emotional one. Sometimes it is walking away from a conversation that has turned circular and unproductive without needing to deliver a final closing statement. These small, repeated choices build the same muscle that larger, more difficult moments will eventually require. In close relationships, this practice looks different than it does with strangers or distant acquaintances. With people you care about, complete withdrawal is rarely the healthy choice. Here, the art of ignoring becomes more about not engaging with every jab, tone shift, or moment of irritability, while still remaining present and available for real conversation when it is needed. This is a more advanced application because it requires you to separate the person's bad moment from the relationship itself, choosing not to escalate small friction into a larger conflict. At work, this practice often shows up as not taking every piece of criticism, gossip, or office tension personally. Not every comment made about you requires a response, a defense, or correction. Many workplace conflicts grow simply because someone felt the need to respond to something that would have faded on its own if left alone. Choosing not to engage with every ripple of tension around you frees up enormous mental space that can be redirected toward the actual work and goals that matter to you. It is worth remembering that this practice is not about becoming unreachable or emotionally distant from the people in your life. The goal is not isolation. The goal is discernment, knowing which moments deserve your full presence and which moments are simply passing noise that will mean nothing in a week. The people who matter most in your life will still get your attention, your patience, and your engagement. What changes is your willingness to give that same attention to every minor provocation that crosses your path. As this practice becomes part of daily life, something noticeable happens. You start to feel less pulled around by other people's moods and behavior. Conversations that once would have ruined your entire day become minor moments you barely remember by evening. This is not because you have stopped caring about people. It is because you have stopped handing your peace over to circumstances outside your control. This is the real, practical outcome of the subtle art of ignoring someone without being rude, and it is a skill that only grows stronger the more deliberately you practice it. Everything covered in this video comes down to one simple shift in how you see silence. It is not a weapon, and it is not a wall. It is a decision made calmly about where your attention belongs. Most people go through life reacting to whatever comes at them, letting every rude comment, every dismissive tone, every small provocation decide how their day will go. The Stoics offer a different way to live, one where your peace is not handed out to anyone who asks for a reaction. That peace stays yours, kept and protected by your own judgment, not given away by habit. This is not a skill you master in a single day, and it is not something you get right every time. There will be moments where you respond when you should have stayed quiet, and moments where old habits of pride or hurt pull you back into arguments that were never worth having. This is normal, and it does not mean the practice has failed. Stoicism was never about perfection. It was about the steady, repeated effort to choose reason over impulse a little more often than you did the day before. Progress here looks like small, quiet wins, not dramatic transformations. What makes this practice powerful is that it asks nothing from anyone else. You do not need the other person to apologize, to understand, or to change their behavior for this to work. You do not need them to know what you're doing internally or to acknowledge your restraint. The entire practice lives inside you, which means no one can take it away from you, and no one can stop you from choosing it. This is one of the quiet strengths of Stoic philosophy. It puts control back where it always belonged, in your own hands, regardless of what anyone else does or says. Think about the people in your life who move through conflict this way. Calm, steady, never rattled by small provocations, never needing the last word. They are not weak, and they are not passive. They are simply operating from a place most people never reach. A place where their sense of self is not built on winning every exchange. This is available to you as well. It does not require a different personality or a rare kind of patience you were born without. It requires practice, attention, and a willingness to pause before reacting. The same three things anyone can build over time. If this video gave you something to carry into your next difficult conversation, that is exactly what it was made for. Consider subscribing to this channel, because more of these ideas are coming, built the same way, grounded in real Stoic thought, and made practical for real life, not just theory left on a page. If someone in your life needs to hear this today, someone who struggles to let things go, or someone who could use a calmer way to handle conflict, share this with them. And if you have a moment, leave a comment below about a time silence served you better than words did. These conversations help this channel grow, and they help build a place where this kind of thinking is shared and practiced together.